on language-independent literacies. We call this project LILIEMA, and I'm actually here with the entire LILIEMA team, and we have a stall over there, and some of you may have already talked to some of my team members. So what I'm reporting here is truly collaborative and not even academic research, but participatory research. So, I already gave myself away. Before I really start, I would like to ask, and particularly the African participants in the room, about whether they use any language other than the colonial language in reading and writing in their daily lives. So please, if you are an African and you use a language other than the colonial language in reading and writing in your daily life, please raise your hand now. Okay, quite a few hands. Okay, now, this is particularly for the Senegalese in the room. Who can read this among the Senegalese, or among the other African participants? Aha, I see quite some hands up here that were not raised before. So clearly some people do read in African languages without recognizing this form of literacy. Because for the people who are not familiar with Senegal, this tomato puree brand is called Diek Bu Diar, which is Wolof, and it's written in Wolof in an orthography that is based on French. I have another little gem for you. And again, any of you who is Senegalese and who has already read or wrote any language in their repertoire in this way, please raise your hand. Nobody? Or maybe you cannot read it, actually. So this is, I think Lisa is a star of a soap opera. She has a Facebook page that has thousands of followers. I can see some nods here. And what they use is this form of literacy that again uses mainly French orthographic conventions mixed with French in its official orthography. But this is a very widespread form of literacy that astonishingly is not recognized, including by its practitioners, as a form of literacy in many cases. Why? Well, probably because it's a grassroots literacy. It has no formal cachet, no stamp of recognition, no language academy, no dictionaries. And so it exists in the shadows of well-established standard language cultures. But exactly this type of literacy that is widespread all over Africa, actually, is what I call language-independent literacy. And the type of literacy that we have been developing in LILIEMA is actually based on these existing grassroots literacies and takes them as the model. So in my talk, I'm going to run you through these topics, and everything I'm going to tell you is based on the LILIEMA pilot that we are currently running in southern Senegal. So first, a little bit on rural multilingualism in Lower Casamance, just because rural multilingualism is so little known. To my knowledge, there are currently only 2 research projects on rural multilingualism. One is the Crossroads project, which I lead, and the other is a project led by Jeff Good at the University of Buffalo in northwestern Cameroon in the Lower Fungum area. And we actually have, is she here? No. Okay, so yes, there she is. So we have one project member here, so if you're interested more in rural multilingualism, talk to her and to Gracien. Very often in our imagination, rural areas are really mono-ethnic areas where you have tribes or ethnic groups inhabiting a space that is construed as being homogeneous, where everybody has and shares one language. However, throughout Africa, in particular in an area that has been called the Sudanic Fragmentation Belt or the Macro-Sudan area, stretching from the Atlantic shores of the Upper Guinea coast to the Ethiopian escarpment, we have an area of extremely high linguistic diversity, often with nominally village-based languages and extremely multilingual populations. And here in Senegal, in Casamance, you have one of those hotspots of linguistic diversity. And here on this map, I'm just showing you the focal area of the Crossroads project that looks at multilingualism at a crossroads of two villages in Casamance, Dibonker, Brin, and then a slightly larger language area consisting of about 10 villages. So at the crossroads of these three villages, we have collected data over a time frame of roughly 8 years. So we have 100 hours of transcribed, translated text that has been tagged for participants and languages, with 211 participants, and our transcribers have identified 20 languages in the language use of these inhabitants of 3 adjacent villages. This is a snapshot of the languages present in our corpus, and you can only see 13 languages because the other languages are proportionally so marginal that you cannot see him here. This is Wolof, this is French, and then the other big chunks are the languages that are nominally associated with these villages, but you see there's a lot more going on in terms of multilingualism. And also I must say that our corpus is skewed towards monolingualism because it has heritage data stemming from language documentation projects that we conducted in these areas that were language-based, so where our presence had an influence on the type of language use we collected. These languages are not dialects. Some of them are closely related varieties, but as you can see here from the underlined languages that I have marked in this family tree of the Atlantic language family, you have languages present in these. I've given you languages that are attested in 2 villages, and it's only a selection anyways. They belong to 2 different branches of the Atlantic family, so that's like being in 2 different branches of Indo-European, or even further removed from each other. Then you have languages that are closely related, but also in different sister nodes of one branch of Atlantic. And finally, in the box at the bottom, you can see the languages that are not genetically related, or very, very remotely related. French, Creole, 2 Mande languages. So, a really bewildering diversity that people span in their language use on a daily basis. How do people manage this diversity in reading and writing? What is really interesting is that, and here I really thank my precursors, in particular Kathleen, who has drawn our attention to the long-standing nature of multilingualism in Africa and also in writing practices in Africa. What is really interesting is that Africans have found their own solutions to integrate diversity and nurture it in indigenous writing and reading practices. And here is an example, I think from Tuba, that illustrates this rather nicely. So you can see this is a shop sign for a photo lab. And what you can see here is the name of the lab, phone number, then in Wolof, with French as the lead language, Sub-Saharan. I have rendition of this in the standard Wolof orthography that is hardly ever used in the public sphere at the bottom. And then you have the same in the West African tradition of Ajami writing, the so-called Wash writing tradition. So what you can see here is that in the absence of institutional support for writing a multilingual repertoire, the solution has been a very ergonomical one. Use the conventions of a language with a well-established literacy tradition and apply it across board to everything you want to write. In general, if this writing happens in the Latin script, it's the convention of the colonial language, which is very often the language of the first and most prominent and prestigious literacy that is used. And if it's in Ajami, Arabic script, it is the prevalent Arabic tradition, regional tradition that is used. This type of writing actually caters for complex repertoires and does not exclude any language, as I can show you here. And it has space for the local, importantly. So this is actually a Facebook post by one of the LILIEMA team members, Emesida Biagi. And you see a thread has been started and his friends are engaging in this very playful dialogue. And everybody who knows literacy in French can read it, even if they do not understand everything. And I bet that barely anybody in this room can understand actually what is written, because you have French. I mean, this is from a code basis. We can discuss later whether this is actually French in terms of code switching or whether it's just translanguaging. You have a very local Diola language, only spoken in one village, Diola Kujirurai. And then you have Wolof, and then you have something that arguably might be English or a truncated form of Wolof Ghanaian. So you see this form of writing supports a very complex repertoire without creating additional hurdles for multilingual writers and readers. And another example, also from a LILIEMA team member, Alfa Nabimane, who's sitting over there, who has kindly provided this illustration for me. This is a magical square, widely used in Islamic mysticism. And the square itself is left empty, so none of you will be any wiser regarding Islamic magic. But the instructions are there, and they are in Mandinka, and Alpha has transliterated and translated them. So again, anybody who has literacy in Arabic, for instance, has attended Quranic school, can also read this and understand it if they speak Mandinka. And some graduates of Islamic schools are also trained in writing this. And again, it applies across complex repertoires. So, our intention initially was not actually to develop literacy. We really wanted to document and understand rural multilingualism. But what was really striking was that when we started training our transcribers, the potential of developing our transcription techniques into a form of literacy became obvious from early on. So this is one of our initial transcription workshops where we trained transcribers that transcribed our multilingual data. And instead of using the International Phonetic Alphabet, we decided to use the official alphabet of languages of Senegal because we were thinking of possible transfer in terms of literacy. And so our transcribers were from the outset trained in this alphabet. Here is an example of a transcription. Again, you see 9 utterances and already 4 languages. 2 of them really local village-based languages, and then French and Wolof. None of us Westerners would have been able to transcribe this because nobody has the necessary language skills. So, our transcribers, most of whom had never written their village-based languages systematically before, only those who have access to social media and sometimes write text messages, were really feeling empowered by their writing skills. And that's what inspired us then to take this a step further and turn it into a form of language-independent literacy, following the repertoire-based literacies that are well enshrined in the area. And we started in January this year with a one-week workshop where we explained the method and developed it together. And it just started with letter cards, photo cards, and very simple props that can be situationally used by teachers who are already working, mainly with children in supplementary school classes. So here is one letter card, and then here you can see an illustration that is adapted to the local repertoires. So the most commonly used languages are present to illustrate the sound letter correspondences. So here you have Tiga, which is arrive in Creole, Tihuch, which is the palm tree in Baino Kujaha, and Becek, the day in Wolof. Or here's another very emblematic letter, the Utrema, Jen, Beker, Bagaj. So we have letter cards made for two different sites. The cards are site-specific, catering to the very different language ecologies in the two villages where we're piloting LILIEMA. Then we had pictures and props. So this is very popular and very easily done. So we take shells and write letters in them, and you can do many interactive games, word recognition, language awareness games, etc. And then we started having pictures. So this is to illustrate the letter A in two languages, Kasa, Creole, and Adig in Baino Kujaha. This is an example actually of one participant who is writing. So you have Jambal, the fishing net, I believe, in Baino Kujaha, and then Jen, fish, and Yahat, fish in Baino Kujaha. So. LILIEMA is very flexible. It can be as mono or multilingual as the situation and the makeup of participants requires it. So for instance, here you have words and the illustrations for two objects in one language, Diola, and many words are shared widely across Diola languages, Eramun and Ekolon. And here you have a gap text with words in three languages. So we really, from the outset, tried to work with teachers to empower them to work with the repertoires and bring out the repertoires of the students in the classrooms, and actually of everybody. So in a sense, everybody is participant on a par, and we're all co-learners. We believe that LILIEMA has many advantages in thickly multilingual situations, especially in a cross-border region like Casamance, because it overcomes colonial borders, which is one of the main reasons why we don't use the informal grassroots literacies based on the orthography of the colonial languages, because, well, here's a rather notorious name, the name Diame, which still resonates with many Senegambians, I believe, and it would have three different orthographic representations in three languages, three colonial languages that left their imprint on names, toponyms, and orthographic conventions. And we are in the Casamance so wedged in between French, English, and Portuguese colonial contexts. So it would be very divisive for us to use, for instance, French orthography as a lead or the English as a lead. And also we want to recognize the fact that the Senegalese state has created a national alphabet and that languages are being codified using the national alphabet, albeit mainly for symbolic representation, especially in the case of small languages. But more importantly, transferring this language-independent literacy to our context means that we overcome the need to select one language, which is always a problem in language-based education. And in a thickly multilingual nation like Senegal, if you need to pick one language, you get a big problem, especially at the bottom of this polyglottic line, where the local languages are present. So Lower Casamance, only the department of Ziguinchor is, I think, about the size, 3 times the size of Luxembourg, with 30 languages and lects. Which one to pick if you really want to invest in mother tongue-based education? It's a huge challenge for educators, because there is a strong need of inhabitants of these places, of course, to have their local languages represented. But at the same time, the reach of these languages is so limited, and the investment needed is so large that these efforts, as we have heard yesterday in Barbara's talk, are very often not really sustainable. So, which means that then very often the translocal languages are the only ones with a real chance of investment. LILIEMA also caters for mobile learners. So here's again Alfan Nabimano, who's sitting there, and he can tell you more about his trajectories and his language skills, which I've just put there at the bottom for you. Inhabitants of a region with high linguistic diversity adapt their repertoire throughout their life based on their trajectories. So repertoires are not static, they fluctuate. And teaching only one local language would lock people in a local sphere, and they would lose the adaptivity that is needed to keep repertoires alive. So hence, a language-independent type of literacy is very useful because it's transferable to new languages in an individual's repertoire. As common in many areas of West Africa, children are also highly mobile, including in rural environments. So again, you see some example here of this little girl, Yombe, to the left. She came to Agnac, the village where I conduct my fieldwork, at the age of 5 to help a mother who just had given birth to her 3rd child and needed help. And this is the household where she lives. But the children who were in that household at the time when that photo was taken are not there anymore. One was fostered out, it's Proth, at the age of 4, and he has now lived in Dakar for about 3 years, so he doesn't speak Gujaha anymore. He has a completely transformed repertoire. And when I was there last year, Marianne, the second one, was with her mother who was ill in Dakar for lengthy period of times. And that is really part and parcel of people's daily lives, which means that the repertoires also fluctuate continuously. And only teaching a local language means that all the effort invested is lost when a child moves to a new context. Women are also moving and circulating a lot, in particular in the patrilineal and very local areas of the area where women are the ones who move when they get married. There are also some matrilineal societies, for instance in the Bijagos and among the SOAS. But women often marry into new communities, new linguistic communities, especially when the communities are very small, and they're not represented in the ethnic imaginations of these places that only cater for the patrimonial language, the language of the male founder of the village and his descendants. But they're still there. And it means that they bring in other repertoires, and it also means that they may not identify that much with the local language. And it also means that they may have been schooled in a different country. So they have their own very specific literacy needs, as I illustrate with Jacqueline Biaye in the household where I work. So she grew up in Guinea-Bissau, and it's very, very common in this area that's 15 kilometers away from the border. And there she learned Gujaha, Creole, Mandinka, and also Fula, because she was a trader in Bissau. Now she speaks Wolof because she's adapting to a Senegalese environment where Wolof has a much bigger role. She did not go to school in Guinea-Bissau, but she's now informally learning French, but she has no literacy in French. LILIEMA, we believe, also helps to valorize local and regional knowledge. First of all, linguistic knowledge and meta-linguistic awareness. And that's maybe one of the most striking aspects of whenever we have a LILIEMA workshop. It's tremendous fun to bring together all these parts of repertoires. And people really cherish that because it also gives value to their multilingualism. And it makes them recognize what is shared, or where there are regular sound correspondences, for instance. And so it nurtures and cherishes something that they do, but that is nowhere formally recognized. And here is an example of women at a soap-making workshop that I was called to take part in last year. And there were about 10 women present. They were making soap and a body lotion made of aloe vera. And they were relying on the memory of one woman, Suzanne Diediou, who knew the recipes. So all the women were gathered to benefit from her skills that she passed on orally. And there were about 10 women and at least 10 different languages of Casamance. The women really came from all over Casamance. And they actually actively demanded for help in being able to write down the recipes. But how would a monolingual approach be useful? I don't know if you're multilingual and you've ever written down a shopping list. My shopping lists, I live in London, I'm German, it's never monolingual, So impose this arbitrary order on a multilingual repertoire. It really goes completely against the very essence of what it means to be multilingual. So, this type of local knowledge has no place and no value in the formal education curriculum, and which also has no connection to local culture and everyday life. But if you open a space beyond this formal educational context for these literacies that are actually of direct relevance to daily life, you can make that connection and strengthen a recognition of the local. Casamance is also a post-conflict area. There was a secessionist war. The Casamance wanted to segregate from the north of the country. And very often, this conflict is cast in ethnic terms, although arguably it never was an ethnic conflict. But the conflict and also the independence war of Guinea-Bissau that brought waves of refugees to the Casamance have created great population movements and a form of literacy that actually brings out the positive aspects of diversity, we believe has great potential for creating social cohesion in these areas. And finally, this is not really our main motivation, but we also believe that there is an important potential of LILIEMA to support literacy as learned in schools by providing supplementary lessons in basic literacy in a language that learners know. And we've heard compellingly from several speakers here, and Carol, for instance, cogently showed that that really makes a difference. And so we actually, we spent last week together in a one-week workshop with very different trainers, teachers, learners of LILIEMA, and we had two women who really had no literacy skills, that did not even know how to hold a pen. And at the end of the week, they were able to hold a pen, write shapes, and recognize letters and simple words. So if you try to do that, added with an unknown language, you create huge exclusion and humiliation, but making it accessible through the languages already takes a big hurdle away from learners. And here is an example, for instance, of a girl, Alida. She came to Anyak as a foster child about 2 years ago. And she comes from Etame, a Bayot-speaking area, her so-called L1. That is now lost. So she's still learning Gujahar and Creole. She speaks a little Wolof now. And now, at school, she's supposed to learn French, which is, quite defying comprehension, right? That she has to cope with all that. And actually, teachers in schools are very much aware of the great cognitive difficulties faced by children who have to learn literacy and numeracy in a medium of instruction that they also have to learn at the same time. And teachers, in fact, as we all know, use languaging practices using local languages already. So when we started LILIEMA, we were immediately invited to use the schoolrooms, the school classes, and teachers said, we want to have your materials, please do not exclude us, because we really are doing this informally and we would like to find a way of integrating this more in the classroom. Of course, however, the teachers do not come from these language areas, so they cannot cater for the very local part of the repertoires. That only people really from the areas can do. So we heard in Barbara's talk that speakers of small languages are very aware of the paradox that they have to confront in their language practices. They want to take part in the globalized marketplace of languages. They want to learn the official languages. They want to take part in standard language culture. But they also really desire a recognition of their small languages. But they know that there's relatively little actual use for exclusively writing a small language, just because of the small reach. If your language is only spoken by 1,000 people, most of whom live together in one space, there is not much scope for developing a language-based form of literacy in that language. By not forcing the choice of either a local language or a lingua franca or French, LILIEMA, we hope, can open a space in which all languages can coexist. And this card shows you that you can even write German in LILIEMA. So, just to make it crystal clear, we do not want to touch French in its standard language culture. We do not plan a revolution. We leave French where it is, and we acknowledge the need of people to be pragmatic and realistic players in their national post-colonial states. We also do not touch the standard language cultures that have partly been developed for larger languages. But we believe that with LILIEMA, we are compatible with these languages because somebody who knows the sound letter associations of LILIEMA can transfer them to the standard language cultures developed for Wolof, Mandinka, Pular, can, with enough exposure to literacy, read some of the beautiful books produced by our colleagues from Aret or Tostan, for instance. But by not exclusively focusing on these language-based literacies, we think that these small languages can also find a space that they otherwise would be excluded from. So, very briefly, I'll run you through the emerging structure of the program. This is brand new. We decided on 2 levels. We have an admission test for students who we have reason to believe have previous literacy experience. They go to level 2. Everybody else goes to level 1. We have a school year for each level lasts 38 years. It's the Casamance school year. In addition to the school holidays, allows for time off during very intensive labor periods, for instance, the cashew harvest. We really worked really hard on identifying literacy goals that make sense in terms of literacy as a social practice, really relevant for people's daily lives. So for level 1, the goal is to be able to read and write words or lists of words, for instance, a shopping list or an inventory or, harvest yield, and read and write names and phone numbers. We do not introduce numeracy because it's very complicated, because there are 3 coexisting systems French, which is also used for phone numbers. Then the several different languages have very complex, anthropomorphically based numeral systems. And then there's a special system for currencies that is based on 5 francs as the basic unit. So you have to multiply or divide everything by 5. So here we only teach actually numbers and their values in French so that people can write down phone numbers because they're always given in French. Level 2, read and write short procedural texts like recipes, route descriptions, messages, letters, and accounts. We have a structure and progression. Here I'm showing you the one for level 1. It has rooms for revision after every 4 lessons, and at the end a big celebration and diplomas. And we focus on the letters that are most widespread in Casamance, where we also cater for some languages that are less widely shared or more associated with Wolof. And we have developed worksheets. For level 1, there's only 1 worksheet per course unit. This is an extract of 1 work unit. So you see a writing exercise where first you have to retrace the letter shapes, then you have to write them independently, and then a picture word matching exercise. And the exercise types are visually explained, and the teachers have a manual that explains the pedagogical approach and the exercise type, which we all developed together with learners. Here are some worksheets for level 2. There are 2 different worksheets for level 2, one for the students, one for the teachers. So to the left you see the student worksheet, which as you can see has less text and no French at all. And the teacher worksheet has explanations so far in French, but you know, who knows? Next steps. Currently we are continuing and evaluating this pilot in 2 villages. We need to finalize teaching materials. We want to have a 3rd level where everybody who has done level 2 and wants to become a local LILIEMA teacher can participate. And we want to partner with or found an NGO to establish and expand LILIEMA. Why do I believe this is important for sustainable development? Well, first of all, we think that LILIEMA really ensures inclusive and equitable quality education, flanking other types of literacy, not replacing them. Because it's linked to lived experiences of all learners, and it doesn't exclude anybody. We also believe that it particularly accounts for the often different trajectories and experience of women, and hence contributes to Sustainable Development Goal number 5. We also believe that it's really important for SDG 8 on economic growth, because it is a type of literacy that caters for the needs of participants in the burgeoning informal economical sector, which are not catered for at all by the formal school system, which only, looks at the needs of the shrinking formal employment market. And finally, we believe that it importantly contributes to SDG 16 on peaceful and inclusive societies, because it promotes diversity and multilingualism as a resource rather than as an obstacle to civic participation. And finally, as I hope I can convince you with this photo that shows all of us forming letters, it is also tremendous fun.
What a pleasure to have a speaker that delivers up to your expectations. And so we'll field questions now. Okay, we take 2 or 3 and then you. Okay, I saw one hand here. Next one, second one. Third. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much, Friederike, for this very thought-provoking contribution. I noted a sentence from you, and let me quote it. LILIEMA opens space in which all languages can coexist. Exactly. when language coexists, it means we are definitely in a situation of language contact. And it means that we are now having problem of, in quote, language ideologies. So what is the situation? What do people think about the language they are playing around with in that context? Thank you.
Okay, I think I have the second question. I'm just wondering, for practical reasons, how you manage it. Are there some written symbols / letters that have more than one sound, or how do you manage the sound symbol correspondence?
See? Yeah. I would like to know why and how you introduced two-size letters, big ones and short ones. As for the first level of training, you introduce only words, and you didn't say much about sentences, construction of writing sentences, and so on.
Okay.
Okay, language ideologies are very, very diverse in Casamance. So we have some language ideologies so all languages in Casamance are territorialized, which is a process of ideological linking of a language to a territory. And you have mainly two different types of language territorialization. One that I call patrimonial territorialization. That is very widespread among, for instance, Bainuk people, who are seen as the autochthones and often are the founders of villages, but have always welcomed and settled strangers. And their language ideology caters for this, because the patrimonial language is only seen as the language of the descendants of the male founder. So while there's only one language formally associated with the place as the language of that place, very often the language names are linked to places, it allows for the fact that there are other languages present. Other places have really rather monolingual language ideologies. That is, for instance, the case in the Bandial area, where people are really attached to Bandial, and where also multilingualism in other Casamance languages is much less pronounced. The languages present in this area are mainly French and Wolof, and they are often seen as very ambivalent recent incomers. But as I said, because LILIEMA can be as monolingual or multilingual as required, it can really be adapted to any given space based on the repertoires and on the stakeholders. Second question, that was Carol, sound and symbol correspondences. So there are some phonological contrasts that we do not cater for, that are sometimes catered for in particular language-specific orthographies. So we are very lucky that the large bulk of symbols is shared across the languages, and the sound grapheme associations are rather straightforward. However, we recognize that some phonological contrasts, like vowel harmony, so contrasting vowel sets, we do not cater for. But we are not prescriptive, so if people have been trained in a language-based program and use these, we will not disallow it. We will encourage that, we will introduce it as a resource. LILIEMA is not based on prescriptive standardization at all, but on bottom-up conventionalization. Finally, Caroline, big and small letters. We thought about that, and the learning goal for level 1 is write down names and phone numbers. And so we introduce the uppercase letters through names. And we introduce each letter as a pair with the lower and uppercase value.
Okay. First, my congratulations to Friederike. I want to put you one only question about the languages you introduced in your project. What type of spelling are you using to teach those women and people you are included in your program? Since you know that the government have already codified 22 languages among among the 25 languages listed and validated. So what is the type of spelling you are using?
The type of what?
Spelling.
Spelling.
Yes.
Okay. So our spelling is compatible with the codified versions, and we adhere to the widely shared symbols that exist in all the language codification documents for the languages we use. However, the spellings actually have not been specified for most of the languages that we work on. To give you an example, the Bainuk language has been codified as one language. However, we are actually dealing with at least 5 different languages that are not mutually intelligible. We have here actually people from 2 different Bainuk-speaking areas. They speak French or Wolof with each other, or Diola. They cannot understand each other. They can recognize individual words, but they cannot talk to each other. The codification document for Bainuk is aware of that. It presents an inventory of letters and a text written with these letters in 3 Bainuk varieties. There are no standardized spellings. And so we adhere to the letter inventory. As I said, we use the national alphabet for Senegalese languages, and we cater for the additional letters that are present in people's repertoires. But we are not creating new standardized spellings, and we are also not able to recur to spellings because they don't exist.
Okay. Here.
Bonjour, je me nomme Papa Marie Diakhaté. Donc j'ai été très intéressé par votre présentation. Et ma question est la suivante. Est-ce que dans vos perspectives, vous prévoyez que LILIEMA peut être une base de traduction pour les manuels de droit? Par exemple, dans ces zones-là, il y a des ONG qui travaillent dans le cadre de l'accès des filles à l'école, du droit des enfants. Donc, est-ce que LILIEMA peut constituer aujourd'hui une base pour la traduction de ces manuels, pour que ces enfants-là, ces communautés-là, puissent les comprendre, surtout par rapport aux parents? Et également, est-ce que vous avez eu des blocages venant des populations dans le cadre de la mise en place de LILIEMA? Quelque chose qui pourrait être perçu, par exemple, comme une menace. Il y a des blocages normaux, mais quelque chose qui... Est-ce qu'à un moment donné, LILIEMA a été perçu comme une menace au sein d'une population locale?
Je réponds maintenant ou j'attends encore une autre question?
Peut-être.
Yes, thank you. The question of prestige. Yeah, because generally we look at prestige always from a very Eurocentric way. We carry urban prestige to rural areas. How is the question of prestige managed in the area?
Yes.
Thank you.
Ok, je vais d'abord répondre peut-être au monsieur qui a posé la question. Donc, si j'ai bien compris, il s'agissait du potentiel de LILIEMA pour les enfants et aussi des blocages possibles qui peuvent préventer en fait l'usage, l'adoption de LILIEMA. Oui, nous espérons en fait qu'il y a des ONG et des partenaires qui vont s'intéresser à LILIEMA et qu'on pourra le développer. Mais pour LILIEMA, il n'est pas possible vraiment de prendre cette méthode au générique et la transférer à un contexte. LILIEMA requiert vraiment la collaboration avec les habitants locaux, parce que c'est leur connaissance linguistique locale qui est vraiment importante. Et c'est cette connaissance qu'on révalorise. Donc, si on va développer cette méthode pour qu'elle soit appliquée ailleurs, il faudrait, et on est en train de développer cela, qu'on développe un paquet pour une formation qu'on peut en fait effectuer en collaboration avec des participants locaux qui seront les professeurs, qui seront les coordinateurs au niveau local. Et la deuxième question, je réponds un peu en français quand même, parce qu'on est quand même les plurilingues.
Il est un peu fort.
Non, Gracien, il est togolais, hein, n'est-ce pas? Oui. Ah, béninois, oh pardon. Donc, ah, ouais. Le prestige, oui, on a beaucoup réfléchi à cette question de prestige et de valorisation du local. And I have to say, you know, you can only create prestige and valorize the local if you put your money where your mouth is. So it means you can rhetorically affirm the importance of the local until the cows go home. Unless you follow suit with action, you are just confirming the existing hegemonies. So what we have been doing in LILIEMA, and we're just starting another project on resilience in West African frontier communities, is we have to say the locals are the experts. We bring certain skills. Everybody of us brings particular skills. I have a training as a language teacher. Mia does great films. We have some computer skills that others don't have. They bring the repertoires. They are the trained transcribers. And they know the local language ecology. We all work together, and that also means we are all experts on a part. So everybody is here now. You know, we have this project that we're developing where we look at migration, mobility, and multilingualism as a resource. Everybody is mobile. Everybody travels to all the workshops. And, you know, I hope the British ambassador is listening. If he is willing to grant visa to all participants, they will also all travel to London. Everything else is just a continuation of this inequality that gives the big prestige to the Europeans who speak particular languages.
Well, I'm afraid we have to stop now. It's been a very stimulating and informative session. And since we have to remain on schedule, okay. Thank you very much. And
but please, if you have questions, please come and see us at our stall and talk to everybody who's there from LILIEMA. They would love to tell you about what we're doing.